The biggest mistake of my life was believing love and money could never mix. That's what I wrote in my journal this morning, sitting on my back porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. At 73, I've learned that some lessons come too late, but perhaps that's why they cut so deep. I live in a small apartment now because I gave up everything to save someone I loved. My name is Evelyn Pierce. For 35 years, I taught high school English, guiding generations of young minds through the complex emotions of Hamlet and the moral dilemmas of Atticus Finch. I prided myself on my wisdom, my insight into human nature. Yet when it came to my own family, I was as blind as the protagonist in a Greek tragedy, walking straight toward my downfall with absolute certainty I was heading towards salvation. They say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back now, I can trace the exact path that led me here, to this smaller house, this simpler life, this hard-won peace. The breadcrumbs were always there, little warnings I chose to ignore because, well, family is family. Blood is thicker than water, isn't that what they say? What they don't tell you is that blood can also drown you if you're not careful. My story isn't about villains or victims. It's about love and its limitations. It's about the painful space between helping and enabling. Most of all, it's about what happens when you finally realize that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and those you love is to say no. Daniel was always the smart one. 7 years younger than me, with our mother's dark curls and our father's quick wit. From the moment my parents brought him home from the hospital, I appointed myself his protector. When he was 5 and I was 12, I used my babysitting money to buy him the baseball glove our parents couldn't afford. When he was 13 and I was 20, I drove 4 hours every other weekend from college to watch him pitch. And when he was 23 and I was 30, I co-signed his first business loan because he had a dream and not much else. "It's just temporary, Evie," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. "Once the business takes off, I'll pay you back double." The business, a small music shop, did well enough at first. Daniel had a gift for connecting with people, for making them believe in whatever he believed in. For 3 years, he made the payments on time. I remember feeling so proud, telling my colleagues about my entrepreneur brother. I even brought my high school students to his shop for a field trip once, watching with quiet satisfaction as he charmed them with stories about vintage guitars and rare vinyl records. But then came the first call. "I hate to ask, Evie," he said, his voice tight with what I now recognize as practiced desperation. "But I'm 3 months behind on the lease. The landlord's threatening to lock me out. If I lose the shop, I lose everything." I had just purchased my first home, a modest 2-bedroom with a garden I'd already filled with dreams. The $7,000 he needed was most of my emergency fund, but the thought of Daniel losing his business, his dream, was unthinkable. "Of course," I said, already reaching for my checkbook. "Family comes first." That was the first drop in a bucket that would take decades to fill. The pattern established itself slowly, almost imperceptibly. A year or two of stability followed by an urgent crisis that only I could solve. A supplier threatening to cut him off. An unexpected tax bill. A necessary renovation to keep up with the competition. Each time, the amount grew larger, the stakes higher, the gratitude more effusive. "You're saving my life, Evie," he would say, those familiar eyes, our father's eyes, brimming with tears. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I told myself I was investing in his future, that someday, when the business finally turned the corner, he would pay me back as promised. I ignored the whispers from friends, the concerned looks from colleagues when I mentioned casually that I was postponing my dream trip to Europe again. "You can't keep putting your life on hold for Daniel," my closest friend Margaret told me over coffee one day. "He's a grown man. He needs to figure things out himself." "You don't understand," I replied, a defensive edge to my voice. "He's so close to making it work. This time is different. This time is different. How many times did I say those words over the years? How many times did I believe them? By the time I retired at 65, I had loaned Daniel over $120,000, money I would never see again, though I didn't know that yet. I had co-signed 2 additional loans that he had eventually defaulted on, damaging my credit score but not my faith in him. I had delayed renovations on my home, scaled back my retirement plans, and quietly accepted that my golden years would be a little less golden than I had once imagined. But I had my health, my pension, and a mortgage-free home. I told myself that was enough, that the sacrifices were worth it to see Daniel finally stable, running a music store that had expanded to include a small performance venue where local bands played on weekends. I attended every show I could, sitting in the back with a glass of wine, watching my little brother work the room with the same charisma he'd always possessed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he would announce, his voice filling the space with practiced ease. "I want to thank a very special person who made all of this possible. My sister, Evelyn, who believed in me when no one else would." The crowd would applaud, and I would blush, and for those moments, every dollar seemed worth it. The truth revealed itself like a slow-motion car crash. You see it coming but can't seem to turn the wheel. 2 years into my retirement, Daniel called with news that seemed too good to be true. A music industry investor had expressed interest in franchising his store concept. The potential payoff was enormous, enough to pay back everything he owed me, and then some. All he needed was capital to make the store presentable, to prove the concept was viable. "How much?" I asked, already mentally rearranging my finances. $60,000, he said. "I know it's a lot, Evie, but this is it. This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for." We. As if his business had always been our shared venture. As if my role had always been to fund his dreams at the expense of my own. I didn't have $60,000 in liquid assets. What I had was a home worth $320,000 and a reverse mortgage option that would let me access some of that equity. "Let me think about it," I said, but we both knew I would say yes. I always said yes. The loan officer at the bank asked if I had consulted a financial advisor, asked if I understood that this would reduce the asset I could leave to my heirs. Not that I had children of my own, but I had always planned to leave something to my nieces, Daniel's daughters who are now in college. "I understand," I said firmly. "Family comes first." I signed the papers 2 weeks later, handing Daniel a check with trembling hands that he mistook for excitement. "This is it, Evie," he said, hugging me tightly. "Everything changes now." He was right about that, at least. 3 months later, I got a call from Daniel's wife, Sarah. We had never been close. She had always seemed uncomfortable around me, perhaps sensing the complicated dynamic between her husband and his sister. But that day, her voice was different, hesitant, afraid. "Evelyn," she said, "there's something you need to know." There was no investor. There never had been. The $60,000 had gone to pay off gambling debts that Daniel had been hiding for years. The business was failing, had been failing for some time, kept afloat by increasingly desperate measures. Credit cards maxed out in the business's name. Loans from other people, friends, acquaintances, even some of his employees. "He needs help," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Not money, real help." I sat in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, as the world I thought I knew crumbled around me. Every sacrifice, every delayed dream, every proud moment, all built on a foundation of lies. The confrontation, when it finally came, was both worse and better than I had imagined. Worse because Daniel didn't deny anything. Better because, for the first time in our lives, we spoke with complete honesty. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said, sitting in my living room, eyes fixed on the floor. The gambling started as just a way to blow off steam. Then it became a way to try to catch up when the store wasn't making enough. Then it became everything. All those times you said the business was about to turn around. Sometimes I believed it too, he said. That's the thing about addiction. You become your own best mark. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to demand he sell everything he owned to pay me back. Instead, I asked the question that had been forming in my mind since Sarah's call. How are we going to fix this? Not how are you going to fix this? How are we? Still unable to separate myself from his problems, still claiming partial ownership of his mistakes. Daniel looked up, relief washing over his face. I knew you'd understand, Evie. I've been thinking, if I could just get a small loan to tide me over while I negotiate with the other creditors. No. The word hung between us, small but immovable. I had never said it to him before. Not about money. No more loans, I continued, my voice finding strength I didn't know I had. No more bailouts, no more enabling. Enabling. His face darkened. Is that what you think you've been doing? Yes, I said simply. And it ends today. What followed was the hardest year of my life. Harder than watching our parents die. Harder than my divorce in my 30s from a brief marriage that had dissolved under the weight of my devotion to my own career and to Daniel's needs. Daniel didn't speak to me for months. His wife and daughters were caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to him and the growing realization that I had been right to finally draw a line. The rest of our extended family took sides, some quietly, some vocally. There were strained holidays, unanswered calls, and nights when I sat alone wondering if I had done the right thing or simply abandoned my brother when he needed me most. But I held firm. For the first time in my life, I put my own financial security first. I met with a financial advisor who helped me understand the full impact of the reverse mortgage and the steps I needed to take to protect what remained of my assets. I rewrote my will, making difficult decisions about who would receive what little I had left. I joined a support group for family members of gambling addicts, where I learned I was far from alone in my experience. Money and family is like oil and water, said Martha, an 80-year-old grandmother who had lost her savings to a grandson's addiction. They never mix well, but we keep trying to stir them together anyway. Slowly I rebuilt my life. Not the one I had planned. That was gone forever. But something new. Something honest. I sold my house and moved to a one-bedroom apartment in a senior living community that offered both independence and community. I took up watercolor painting, something I had always wanted to learn but never made time for. I volunteered at the local library, leading a book club for seniors, where we discussed everything from classic literature to the complex emotions of aging. And I learned to be honest about my mistakes. I enabled him because it made me feel important, I admitted during one particularly difficult support group meeting. I needed to be needed, and that need nearly cost me everything. The healing between Daniel and me came slowly, in fits and starts. First a text message on my birthday, then a brief call at Christmas. Finally, a request to meet for coffee 6 months after our confrontation. He looked older, sitting across from me at the small cafe table, thinner. The charisma dimmed, but not extinguished. I'm 6 months clean, he said without preamble. Gamblers Anonymous. Therapy twice a week. I sold the store. I'm working as a music teacher at the community center. I nodded, afraid to hope but unable to stop myself. Sarah and I are trying to work things out, he continued. The girls they're angry, but they're talking to me. Small steps. Small steps, I echoed. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. I'll never be able to pay back what I took from you, he said, his voice thick. Not just the money, the trust, your retirement, the life you should have had. No, I agreed, no longer interested in sugarcoating the truth. You won't. But I'm going to try, he said. If you'll let me, I'd like to be your brother again. Not the one who takes, but the one who gives whatever he can. Even if it's just time, attention, care. I didn't say yes right away. I had said yes too quickly, too often in the past. I need to think about it, I said instead. It's been 3 years since that coffee shop conversation. 3 years of careful rebuilding. Daniel and I see each other once a month. He comes to my apartment and we play Scrabble or watch old movies. We talk about books and music, and sometimes, when we're both feeling strong enough, about the past, about what went wrong, about the patterns we both played into. He's still working at the community center, teaching music to kids who can't afford private lessons. Every month, he gives me a little money, sometimes $50, sometimes $100. Not because I asked for it, or because I need it to survive, but because it's a symbol of his commitment to making amends in whatever small way he can. I've made peace with the fact that I'll never have the retirement I once envisioned. No world cruises or vacation homes. My legacy to my nieces will be modest, more about values than valuables. But I've found joy in this simpler life, in the watercolor sunsets I paint, in the friendships I've formed with other women who have weathered their own storms, in the knowledge that it's never too late to learn, to change, to stand up for yourself. The most important lesson I learned after 70 is this: love and money do mix, whether we want them to or not. But they mix like fire and gasoline, with the potential to warm or to destroy. The difference lies in the boundaries we set, the truths we're willing to face, and the courage to say no when yes would be so much easier. I sit on my small balcony now instead of a back porch, watching different sunrises over a different horizon. My coffee tastes just as sweet. My journal fills with different wisdom. The greatest act of love, I wrote this morning, is sometimes the hardest word to say, no. Because saying no to someone you love isn't about rejection. It's about respect for them, for yourself, and for the truth of what is, rather than what we wish could be. That's the lesson that came too late for me, the one I hope comes earlier for you. And this time, when I say no, I know it's not the end. It's the beginning. Financial takeaway. As we age, our financial resilience decreases while our vulnerability often increases. The safety nets we've carefully built over decades can unravel quickly through a single misplaced trust. Financial boundaries aren't cold or unfeeling. They're necessary protections for both yourself and your loved ones. As financial advisor Rebecca Winters often says, love your family with your heart, protect your future with your mind. Create clear documentation for loans, consult professionals before co-signing or leveraging assets, and remember that enabling harmful financial behavior isn't an act of love. It's an act that ultimately harms everyone involved. Reverse mortgages are complex tools that, when misused or emotionally leveraged, can quietly erase decades of equity. Consult with a trusted advisor. Never rush into one for someone else's crisis. Your financial security isn't selfish. It's the foundation that allows you to truly be there for others without becoming a burden yourself. Have you ever made a financial decision from love and lived to regret it? Share your story in the comments. Your experience could be the warning someone else needs. And if you believe honest stories can change lives, like this video and subscribe to Gold Print. Real choices, real lessons, real courage.